gut motility, and how long it's taking food to go make its way through, and essentially around colonic motility, or more likely lack thereof. It's when people actually have, fecal loading or constipation. Because when we get the situation where fecal matter is in there for a fair period of time, and for some people, this can be 10, 15, 20 days actually transit time from, mouth to toilet bowl, as I tell my patients. And I think this is an easy thing you can test at home. And I think everybody should be totally onto this and be aware of this. But you can have some corn on the cob or some red quinoa, black quinoa, or even some green peas. Don't chew them particularly well. Don't choke, but don't chew them all that well. You want to be able to see them come out the other end. Just take note, write down when you actually ate it. Keep track and look at your bowel movements in great detail over the coming days and see when it starts coming through. I've had patients who were doing, a lovely type 4 stool, which is a Bristol stool, which some people would call the perfect poo, every single day, never missed a day. And it took 10 days for the corn to come out the other end. Wow. And I've had other patients who were only pooing every 2 or 3 days. It was 26 days before the corn came out the other end. Wow. And if you could imagine how much they're reabsorbing from that. And it's something that, Hippocrates said, death sits in the bowels, or essentially all disease begins in the gut. And I think this is one of the concepts around that, is that when we have, and older naturopaths used to call this bowel toxemia, in that we've got this sort of old fecal matter there that's constantly leaking bacterial toxins into the system. So that's one of the key things we look at, is like looking at transit time. And if transit time is slow, then we're obviously absorbing through the colon mucosa a lot more of those toxins. And particularly what I'm referring to is endotoxins, or also known as lipopolysaccharide, which is part of the the cell wall gram-negative bacteria, which is a group of bacteria in the gut. So that's one consideration, is transit time. 2 is microbiome composition. Yeah, and this is also fits in with the endotoxin or lipopolysaccharide, because people's ecosystems they're all unique. My ecosystem will not look like yours. You could take like 1,000 people, and there'll be some similarities, obviously, but there'll be marked differences. And just like your fingerprint's unique, your microbiome signature is unique, and more similar to your siblings and your mom, probably anyone else in the world, but still quite different. But within that sort of individual composition, there'll be certain ecosystem traits that you'd see as pro-inflammatory, depending on that composition. And if your ecosystem contains greater amounts of what we call gram-negative bacteria, but a specific grouping of that called proteobacteria, they're much more problematic from an inflammatory perspective. 80% of the cell wall structure of gram-negative bacteria is lipopolysaccharide, or endotoxin. And this isn't a toxin in that the bacteria is secreting it to make us ill. It's like, we grow hair, we grow fingernails, it grows lipopolysaccharide. It's just what it does. And just when they die, they kind of release that lipopolysaccharide into your gut lumen. And now, some people only have, I had patients yesterday where they 0.4% proteobacteria. And I've had other patients who are 50% proteobacteria, to probably give the 2 extreme ends of that. And most people are not in either of the 2 extremes. But the amount of proteobacteria that's present has a huge contributor to potential inflammatory load, essentially, because when you've got greater amounts of proteobacteria present and other gram-negative bacteria, and there's other groupings like Bacteroidetes or Verruca microbia, that also have endotoxin involved with that they grow too, but it's far less inflammatory. It's really proteobacteria that we really clue in with, because it's a super inflammatory compound. Yeah. So we look at the composition there, and we know that lipopolysaccharide essentially works as it's an immensely pro-inflammatory agent. It can cause damage to the gut itself, so cause a leaky gut. But when it reaches the circulation, this is where we know it can impact things like blood sugar regulation negatively, decreases insulin sensitivity. It can damage the blood-brain barrier. It changes what neurotransmitters we produce. It causes inflammation in the brain, and it interferes with mitochondrial function. Yeah, so we've got this situation where we've got these bacteria that are releasing these toxins, and some people are releasing a lot more of those, and there's certain dietary choices that we make that actually can enhance or decrease the absorption of that endotoxin as well. Yeah. So you'd see that you're having these sort of mitochondrial poisons that you're absorbing 24 hours a day. And then sometimes with certain meals, you get a spike of lipopolysaccharide hitting the bloodstream. And that's termed endotoxemia now, or metabolic endotoxemia to be a bit more specific. So that's the other aspect, is looking at microbiome composition. From a pro-inflammatory perspective, but then conversely, we have other species in the gut that we would see as having the opposite effect of producing anti-inflammatory compounds, and those have capacity to promote gut healing. So you might put, species like most people are familiar with, like bifidobacteria, is one that we would see as having anti-inflammatory sort of gut healing qualities. Yeah. There's others that are less well known, like Akkermansia eosinophilia is also a species that we see as helping promoting gut health and gut integrity, and subsequently helps with blood sugar regulation, and even helps determine your metabolic rate, but which I think is super cool too. But there's another bigger group that we call butyrate producing species. And I think you can see butyrate as almost the counterpoint of lipopolysaccharide, and that butyrate has a healing anti-inflammatory effect in the gut. It is the main food source for your colon cells. And many people are we've been aware of that aspect of things for a long time. But I still think it's pretty amazing to think that we've evolved reliant on bacterial production of this compound to feed certain group of our cells that are really key for our good health. And the issue here is if we don't have enough butyrate producing species, we don't make that much butyrate as a consequence of that. And that any butyrate we do make in the gut is sort of avidly consumed by our colon cells, and none of it reaches the sort of body-wide circulation. It's only when we sort of make enough butyrate that it exceeds our sort of colon cells capacity, that butyrate reaches the systemic circulation, floats through the area, and there we get the anti-inflammatory effects body-wide of butyrate. And it has a healing effect on the blood-brain barrier, decreases neural inflammation, and improves mitochondrial function, improves blood sugar regulation, improves metabolism. It's a pretty amazing substance, actually, butyrate. The more we research it, the more stunning we actually find that it is. And we've got these little factories in us, all of us do. The population can vary dramatically too, from, the lowest I've seen is 2% of an ecosystem being butyrate producing species. And the highest I've seen is like 65%. So again, a huge variation there that can determine how much of an anti-inflammatory effect we're getting from that microbiome versus the pro-inflammatory effect that we get when it's more proteobacteria and more lipopolysaccharide. And I think the third thing to look at is gut integrity. So when the gut is what we call a leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability, we have more of the lipopolysaccharide that actually leaks through into our systemic body-wide circulation, and we get more of the negative aspects to our health and essentially inflammation that goes everywhere. But people will have their own sort of weak areas where I think that inflammation will become more manifest, and that will differ a bit per person. Where some people with endotoxemia will start developing insulin resistance. Some people will start developing weight gain. Other people start, I think it's got a role personally with autoimmune conditions as well. Some people get brain fog, and we know that endotoxins play are pretty pivotal role with something like Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. There's been some very cool research where they've done autopsies of the brains of Alzheimer's patients, and they're super rich in endotoxin. And people who do not have Alzheimer's, it's not rich with endotoxin, like it's not in their brains, nowhere near as a degree. So I think it's for me, it's those three areas that I'm always looking at. It's like, what's gut integrity like? What's the microbiome composition look like? And what's your transit time? Because alterations in any of those three things can certainly play a pivotal role with essentially your inflammatory status. And I think that flows into cognitive function, that flows into just level of energy, I would suggest two for that matter. But then if people have got 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 not working well or imbalanced, then we get major problems.